Chapter 6, Mishnah 7. This Mishnah deals with the laws of bird offerings that were brought with improper intent. It starts with the laws that apply with the avodah of one type of korban was done with the intention that it should serve as a different type of korban. That is, a bird chatas was offered for the sake of an olah, or a bird olah was offered for the sake of a chatas. We learned in the first chapter of this tractate that if an essential avodah of one type of animal korban was done for the sake of a different type of korban, it is valid. The Kohanim complete its avodah, they burn it on the Mizbeach, and the parts that are meant to be eaten are eaten. But the owner has not fulfilled his obligation, and he must bring another korban in its place. The Chatas and the Pesach are exceptions to this rule. If one of them is offered for the sake of a different type of korban, it is not valid at all. Our Mishnah teaches that the same laws apply to bird offerings. If someone did malika to a bird chatas, not for its own sake, but for the sake of an olah, or he squeezed out its blood not for its own sake, but for the sake of an olah, or he did either of these avodas for its own sake and not for its own sake, or he did, let's do that again, or he did either of these avodas for its own sake and not for its own sake, that is, he began the avodah for the sake of a chatas, but finished it for the sake of an olah, or he did either of these avodas not for its own sake and for its own sake, that is, he began the avodah for the sake of an olah, but finished it for the sake of a chatas, the korban is invalid in every respect. Like an animal chatas, if a bird chatas had one of its essential avodos, melika and squeezing out the blood done, even in part for the sake of a different type of korban, it is completely invalid. The Mishnah now deals with the opposite case, where a bird olah was offered with the intention that it should serve as a bird chatas. If an essential avodah, melika, or squeezing out the blood of a bird olah was done for the sake of a chatas, the korban is valid, except that it does not count for the owner toward fulfilling his obligation. Just as an animal olah that was brought for the sake of a different type of korban is valid, but the owner does not fulfill his obligation, the same is true of a bird olah. Beside the intention of not for its own sake, there are two other types of intentions that can invalidate a korban. A, outside its place. The Kohen did an essential avodah intending to eat its meat outside the place in which it must be eaten, or to throw the blood outside the place in which it must be thrown, or to burn the amurin outside the place in which they must be burnt. B, past its time. The Kohen did an essential avodah intending to eat the meat after the time in which it must be eaten, or to throw the blood after the time in which it must be thrown, or to burn the amurin after the time in which they must be burnt. In all these cases, the korban is completely invalid and may not be eaten, even in the correct time and place. However, korban brought with the intention of past its time, which is known as pigul, is treated more strictly in that someone who eats it, even in the correct time, is liable to karas. These laws were taught above in the context of animal offerings. See Mishnah chapter 2, Mishnahs 3 through 5. Our Mishnah teaches that they apply also to bird offerings. If someone did malika on or squeezed out the blood of either a bird chatas and a bird olah, with a wrongful intention to eat something that is normally eaten, i.e. a bird chatas, which is eaten completely by kohanim, or to burn on the mizbeach something that is normally burnt, i.e. a bird olah, which is burnt entirely on the mizbeach, then the law depends on the nature of his intention. If his intention was to eat it or burn it outside its place, the korban is invalid, but there is no penalty of karas for eating it. And if his intention was to eat it or burn it past its time, it is pigul, and a person is liable to karas for eating it, provided that the permitter, i.e. its blood, is offered as required without any other invalidation. If the blood becomes invalid for some other reason, the law of pigul does not take effect on the meat of this korban. The Mishnah illustrates the last point. In what manner is the permitter considered to have been offered as required? 1. If he did malika in silence, i.e. without any invalidating intention, and then he squeezed out the blood with the intention of eating or burning it past its time. 2. Or he did malika with the intention of eating or burning it past its time, and then he squeezed out the blood in silence without any invalidating intention. 3. Or he did malika and squeezed out the blood, both of them with the intention of eating or burning it past its time. This is a case in which the permitter has been offered as required. Since in all these cases the two blood avodas were completed without an invalidating intention other than pigul past its time, the law of pigul takes effect. The Mishnah now gives a list of 6 examples in which the permitter is not considered to have been offered as required because there were other invalidating intentions as well. There are 2 kinds of intentions that invalidate a korban besides pigul: the intention to eat or burn the korban outside its place, and the intention to offer chatas for the sake of another offering, shelo lishma. The Mishnah gives examples of both. It begins with 3 cases in which an outside the place intention was involved. In what manner is the permitter not considered to have been offered as required? 1. If he did malika with the intention of eating or burning the korban outside its place, and then he squeezed out the blood with the intention of eating or burning the korban past its time. 2. Or he did malika with the intention of eating or burning the korban past its time, and then he squeezed out the blood with the intention of eating or burning the korban outside its place. 3. Or he did malika and squeezed out the blood with the intention of burning or eating the korban outside its place, besides the intention of burning or eating it past its time. The law for the previous 3 cases will be given below. The Mishnah now continues with 3 cases in which a not for its own sake intention was involved with the pigul intention. 4. Or he did malika on a bird chatas not for its own sake but for the sake of a different korban, which invalidates it, and then he squeezed out its blood with the intention of eating it past its time. 5. Or he did malika on the bird chatas with the intention of eating it past its time, and then he squeezed out its blood not for its own sake but for the sake of a different korban. 6. Or he did malika and squeezed out its blood not for its own sake but for the sake of a different korban, besides the intention of eating it past its time. The Mishnah states the law that applies in each of these 6 cases. This is a case in which the permitter was not offered as required. In all 6 cases, since he did at least one avodah with an invalidation intended besides pigul, the blood, the permitter, was not offered as required, as the pigul classification therefore does not take effect. The Mishnah now discusses cases where the Kohen had different types of invalidating intentions during the same avodah. If he did a single avodah, malika, or squeezing out the blood on a bird chatas intending to eat a kazayas of the meat outside its place, and to eat a kazayas of its meat tomorrow, which is past the allotted time, or the reverse, he intended to eat a kazayas of the meat tomorrow and to eat another kazayas outside its place, or he intended to eat half a kazayas of the meat outside its place and half a kazayas of it tomorrow, or the reverse, he intended to eat half a kazayas of the meat tomorrow and half a kazayas outside its place. In all these cases, the korban is invalid, but there is no penalty of kares for eating the meat, because the pigul prohibition did not take effect on it. The next Tana disagrees with part of the previous ruling, as well as with some of the earlier rulings. Rabbi Yehuda says this is the rule for invalidating intentions involving pigul, if the intention about time came before the intention about place. It is pigul, and a person is liable to the penalty of kares for eating it. And if the intention about place came before the intention about time, it is invalid, but there is no kares for eating it. But the sages say, both in this case, where the time intention came first, and that case, where the place intention came first, the korban is invalid, but there is no penalty of kares for eating its meat. The Mishnah concludes with a unanimous ruling. If one intended to eat half kazayas and to burn half kazayas past their time or outside their place, the korban is valid, because intentions about eating and burning do not combine. Since neither of these intentions was effective by itself, because they were about less than a kazayas, and the 2 of them do not combine, there is nothing here to invalidate the korban.